My wife and I are colleagues at the hospital. We've been married for 5 years, but we've never made our relationship public. The most absurd part is that she never allows our son to call her mom. This is because the beginning of our marriage was the result of a drunken mistake. She married me because she was pregnant and hated me for it. Later, when colleagues came over for a dinner party, she forced me to take our child and stay at a hotel. I thought that my patience and tolerance would eventually win her heart, but when I returned home the next day, I happened to bump into her crush walking out of the bedroom in his pajamas. Chapter 1. Capital City Central Hospital. Maria introduced her crush, Makoto, to me. She said, "Makoto is a new cardiologist. Please show him around." Looking at her professional demeanor, it was hard to believe that the woman in front of me was my wife, whom I had been secretly married to for 5 years. But recalling the email I received last night, I suppressed my pain and replied, "All right." After getting Makoto familiar with the place, I went to the director's office alone. I said, "Director, I will be going to Harvard Medical School for further training next month. This is my resignation letter." After handing in my resignation, I walked out of the director's office. When I looked up, I saw Maria in her white coat rushing toward me. I instinctively stopped and froze for a moment. Maria was the youngest associate chief surgeon in cardiothoracic surgery. She was talented, beautiful, and well-liked by many in the hospital. As her junior, I had secretly admired her for years. At our alumni reunion 2 years after graduation, the two of us had a one-night stand, and I accidentally got her pregnant. We had to marry. I had hoped that after marriage, I could warm her cold heart, but an iceberg is always an iceberg. Maria never allowed us to publicly acknowledge our marriage. She even insisted that our son, David, call her aunt outside the house. At that moment, seeing her, I instinctively called out, "Maria." But Maria furrowed her brows and coldly responded, "Dr. Wong." Her formal, distant address reminded me it was work time, and we were just colleagues. My heart ached for a moment. I had wanted to talk to her about resigning, but she hurried past me without a word, heading towards Makoto, who was standing by the elevator, holding a medical file. Smiling at her, I gave a self-mocking smile. Makoto was Maria's university classmate. After graduation, he went abroad for further studies. 2 months ago, after completing his studies, he returned to the country and joined this hospital. Back in the day, they were inseparable. Maria had always been distant and cold to everyone, but she was slightly warmer toward him. Even now, she was my wife and the mother of my child, but she still acted this way. I watched as Maria said something to Makoto, her expression softening for a moment. She even kindly blocked the elevator to let him go first. I lowered my head, suppressing the sour feeling in my chest. This tender, considerate side of Maria, I'd never seen it before. Since her heart could never be warmed, I decided to let it go. I would divorce her and set her free. Since there were no surgeries today, I got off work on time and went to pick up David from the kindergarten. "Dad." David's eyes lit up when he saw me. He ran over and jumped into my arms, saying, "You're off work so early today." I smiled, infected by his joy, and said, "You really wanted to see Dad, huh?" David nodded eagerly and said, "Of course, I want Dad to come pick me up this early every day." Looking into his clear eyes, I felt a tight knot in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to say the promise I had been meaning to make. In the end, I could only ruffle his hair and say, "I'll try to pick you up early every day from now on." He replied, "Okay." I looked at David, who was overjoyed by just this one promise, and I felt a deep sense of guilt. The loveless marriage between Maria and me had also burdened David, making him suffer along with me. In the next moment, my gaze hardened with determination. In a month, I would take David and leave. From then on, I would pour all my love into David, ensuring he grew up happy and healthy. When I got back to the neighborhood with David, I unexpectedly ran into Makoto and Maria, who were moving out of the building. I instinctively wanted to leave, but Makoto noticed me first and greeted me with a smile. "Dr. Wong, you live in this neighborhood too. Looks like the neighborhood Maria found for me is quite nice. We're both living here." I froze for a moment, then looked at Maria, who appeared completely indifferent. The discomfort in my heart couldn't be suppressed. I remembered when we were buying our home, Maria had said it was too much trouble and refused to go house hunting, leaving it all to me. Now that Makoto was renting a place, she didn't mind the trouble and was hands-on in helping him. I smiled politely and tried to take David away, but Makoto looked at David and, surprised, said, "Dr. Wong is a year younger than me. I didn't expect your child to be this old already." He smiled and patted David on the head, then casually asked, "I'm curious, what does the child's mother do?" His casual question made Maria's expression tighten, and she shot me a sharp look, almost like a warning. I met her gaze and felt a coldness in my heart. I paused for a moment, then smiled at Makoto and slowly said, "She's a doctor, just like Maria. She works in cardiothoracic surgery." Chapter 2. Maria subtly furrowed her brow. but quickly returned to her usual calm demeanor. However, I didn't miss the fleeting darkness that flashed in her eyes, and my heart sank. Was Maria really so afraid of letting Makoto know she was married and had a child? In the past, I might have wanted everyone to know about my relationship with Maria, but now, I had already decided to leave, and there was no need to expose this relationship any longer. So, seeing the surprised look in Makoto's eyes, I added, David's mother works in another province and rarely comes back. Makoto nodded, the shock fading from his expression. He smiled and began to greet David. He said, "Hello, David, I'm..." Before he could finish, Maria interjected just in time, saying, "The movers have almost finished. We should head upstairs to check on things." I understood that she was trying to get Makoto to leave before anything else was said between him and David. Looking at David's confused expression, my heart ached, but I had no choice but to suppress the feeling. Tightly holding onto David's hand, I said, "Then you two carry on, we won't disturb you." After saying this, I turned and left with David. That night, after David had gone to bed, I was still waiting for Maria to come home. I stared at the divorce papers on the table, my feelings mixed, but not a trace of reluctance. This marriage, which had started with a one-night fling, was a mistake from the beginning. Now, divorcing her was just a way to cut my losses. As I was lost in thought, there was a sound at the door, and Maria entered the living room. The light from her phone screen illuminated her enchanting face, and there was a faint smile in her eyes. She didn't even glance at me and was focused on typing on her phone. Seeing her like this, my heart felt as if it had been dipped in cold water. Maria rarely looked at her phone, and she definitely wouldn't chat so intensely with anyone. Now, I didn't need to guess. I knew exactly who she was chatting with. As she was about to enter the bedroom, I snapped back to my senses and called out to her, "Maria, I need to talk to you." Maria stopped and turned to look at me, her gaze once again cold and indifferent. She asked, "What is it?" I didn't mind her cold expression and said flatly, "Let's get a divorce." I locked my gaze on hers, my tone serious, but Maria didn't even wrinkle her brows. Without hesitation, she rejected me, saying, "Impossible." I hadn't expected her to respond this way. I froze for a moment, wanting to say something more, but before I could, she decisively turned and entered the bedroom, ending our conversation with one sentence. "I can't let my child grow up in a single-parent family." Watching her retreating figure, I only felt ridiculous. David wasn't even allowed to call her mom in front of others. So what difference did it make between us and a single-parent family? The divorce conversation ended abruptly, and I had no choice but to keep the divorce papers safe and look for another opportunity to get her signature. The next morning, after dropping David off at kindergarten, I went to the hospital. Even though I only had less than a month before leaving, I still had to finish my last shift properly. As soon as I arrived at the hospital, I was about to go on rounds when a nurse stopped me. She said, "Dr. Wong, wait a moment. Your patient, Sam, is arguing with his son. Be careful, he might accidentally hurt you." I was stunned for a moment, remembering hearing that Sam's son was addicted to gambling and had squandered the family's fortune. Now, he was asking for money for his father's medical treatment. Every time Sam's son came, Sam would be so angry that he would need a long time to recover. But Sam was already old, with high blood pressure and coronary heart disease, so he couldn't afford to get angry. I was worried and decided to go stop them. When I reached the door to the patient's room, I heard the sound of something shattering. I was startled and quickly pushed open the door. To my surprise, I found Maria standing behind Makoto, with broken glass scattered all over the floor. She was gently comforting Makoto but didn't seem to notice the cut on her arm, blood starting to spill from it. The buzzing in my ears drowned out everything else, and I could only focus on the bright red blood. I fought to steady my shaking hands and called security to escort Sam's son away. After confirming that Sam was physically fine, I went to get alcohol and bandages. But before I could return, I saw Makoto already applying medicine to Maria's wound. His movements were gentle, and his eyes were filled with a tenderness he couldn't hide as he said, "It must hurt, right? You really didn't need to protect me. I could have avoided it." Maria shook her head, smiling softly. "It's all right, as long as you're not hurt." I froze for a moment, looking at the warm scene between the two of them. I couldn't help but feel how foolish my earlier thoughts had been. Chapter 3. I turned to leave when I overheard the nurses chatting nearby. "I've never seen Dr. Maria care so much about someone. It looks like Dr. Ito is really something special. If Makoto and Maria got together, they'd be a perfect match." The words "perfect match" hit me like a sarcastic mockery of our past marriage. I froze in place, unable to move. No one knew that Maria was my wife, yet they praised her as a better match with another man. I was about to pretend I hadn't heard them and leave, but one of the nurses saw me and pulled me over, asking, "Dr. Wong, you heard that too, right? Aren't they a perfect match?" Under the gaze of all the nurses, I smiled and said, "Yes, they're indeed a perfect match." Just as I finished speaking, I heard Makoto's voice. He asked, "What do you mean by perfect match? What are you all talking about?" Looking toward the sound, I saw that both of them had already dressed their wounds and were walking toward us. I was about to change the subject, but the nurse spoke up first, jokingly saying, "Dr. Ito, we all think you and Maria are a perfect match. You two are made for each other." Upon hearing this, Maria's eyes darkened, and her brows furrowed. Makoto was stunned for a moment, then quickly waved his hands and said, "You're mistaken. Maria and I aren't." Maria, however, coldly interrupted, her gaze now filled with some reproach as she looked at me. She said, "Instead of discussing other people's private matters, shouldn't you all be focusing on calming down the patients and preventing such incidents from happening again?" Her words were harsh and left everyone's face pale. The atmosphere grew tense and awkward. I was speechless. She didn't care about these things. She just didn't want others gossiping about Makoto. I immediately understood her intentions, but seeing the way my colleagues were looking at me, I calmly responded, "Is this the reason Maria is so protective? Does she really have feelings for Dr. Ito? And we've hit the mark." As soon as the words left my mouth, I saw Maria's expression change. Makoto quickly denied it, saying, No, we're just classmates." I nodded and said, "Just a joke, don't mind it." After that, I made an excuse to leave, saying I had medical records to write and hurriedly walked away. It wasn't until I returned to my office, shut the door behind me, and let out a deep sigh that I finally relaxed. As I reflected on the shadow that passed over Maria's face when Makoto called them just classmates, I realized that over all these years, I wasn't the only one who had been pained by unrequited love. But then, as I remembered my plans to study abroad, I regained my composure. At least I had decided to leave. This drama was no longer mine to be a part of. That afternoon, I took the divorce papers to find Maria. I knocked on the door and found her watering a potted plant on the desk. Her expression was focused, serious. She wasn't tending to flowers. It looked more like a precise operation. I paused for a moment, feeling a little stunned. Maria had always disliked plants because they attracted insects, and she wouldn't even let David keep succulents. So why was she taking such great care of this one now? I furrowed my brow and saw a small sign hanging on the plant that read Ito. No wonder she was being so careful. It was a gift from Makoto. I couldn't help but feel speechless. I turned the divorce agreement to the final page, where she needed to sign, and handed it to her. I said, "Please sign this." Before I could finish my sentence, Maria's phone rang from the desk. I caught a quick glance at the name, Makoto, and saw her immediately answer the phone. Makoto's voice came through. "Maria, there's a patient with a tricky situation. Can you come help me take a look?" A trace of anxiety flashed across Maria's eyes. She immediately stood up and said, "Wait for me. I'll be right there." Without hanging up, she took the divorce papers from my hands, signed them without looking, and handed them back. She hurried out, still speaking to Makoto, reassuring him. I watched her quickly leave and looked at the beautifully written signature of Maria on the divorce agreement. A mixture of emotions filled me, but in the end, I only sighed in relief. It was finally over. Chapter 4. In the following days, I continued working normally, taking care of David, while also looking for a place to rent. After all, now that I was divorced from Maria, I needed to move out of the house. The day I finalized the rental for a new place, Maria suddenly knocked on my office door. "Do you have a moment?" I was a little puzzled. Maria rarely came to my office to avoid suspicion. Even when discussing work, she would always go to her own office. Why was she suddenly here today? I asked. "Is there something you need?" Looking at her, Maria closed the door behind her and said calmly, "One of our colleagues is coming over to my house for a celebration. You should leave work early, pack up, and take David somewhere else for the night." I was taken aback for a moment. So she came here just to get us out of the house, but that was still my home. Why should we hide just to maintain her image as a single woman? Were we really that shameful? I looked at her, but all I saw in her eyes was the usual cold indifference. The words I wanted to say got stuck in my throat, and I could only respond, "Got it." I had already planned to leave today, and I didn't want to get into any further arguments with her. With that thought, I added a tone of finality, saying, "I'll pack my things and leave with David. We won't bother you." After that, I didn't say another word and returned to reading the medical records. Maria's brows furrowed slightly. Sensing something was off, she parted her lips as if wanting to say something but held back, probably remembering that Makoto was waiting for her. She nodded and left without saying another word. That evening, I finished work early and went to pick up David from kindergarten. On the way home, I took his hand and said, "David, once we get home, pack your things, and then we'll go to a new place to live, okay?" David stopped in his tracks, looked at me for a moment, then suddenly asked, "Dad, did you and Mom get divorced?" I was stunned for a moment and squatted down to look into his eyes. I asked, "Why do you ask that, David?" David honestly replied. Luna's mom doesn't live with her dad anymore, and the teacher said that's called getting a divorce. He tilted his head and blinked his clear eyes. He said, Dad, did you get divorced from Mom? And that's why we're going to stay somewhere else? I hadn't expected him to be so perceptive. My heart clenched. I hesitated for a long time, carefully choosing my words before asking, if Dad and Mom got divorced, would you be sad? David's chubby little face scrunched up, and without thinking, he nodded. Yes. My heart sank, and guilt flooded over me. I had been so focused on leaving, but I hadn't considered how this would affect David. As I was lost in my thoughts, I heard David's sweet voice again. He said, because if Dad's sad, I'll be sad too. But if Dad isn't sad, then I won't be sad. His words were like the warm sun in spring, chasing away the guilt in my heart. I hugged David tightly. My voice choked as I said, Dad won't be sad as long as I have you. Dad will never be sad. David also reached out and hugged me. He said, I only want Dad. She doesn't let me call her Mom, so I don't want her. My heart felt bitter, knowing I hadn't been a good father before, but as I felt the warmth of his small body in my arms, and with only 10 days left before I could leave this place, a sense of comfort slowly filled me. I lifted David in my arms, a smile tugging at my lips, and said, all right, let's pack up and leave that place. We're going to our new home. David nodded excitedly. Yay, we're going to our new home. We packed our things and moved into the new rental. As soon as we arrived at the new house, I received a call from a colleague. Dr. Wong, we're having dinner at Dr. Ito's house tonight. Why aren't you here yet? The phone on the other end was full of noise and chatter. I paused for a moment, about to decline, when I heard Makoto's joking voice from the phone. He said, Maria, I lost a game, and they want me to find someone to drink a toast with. Before he could finish, Maria's voice, tinged with urgency, interrupted. She said, I'll drink with you. Chapter 5. On the other end of the phone, the teasing sounds grew louder, and I felt frozen, unable to say a word. Maria eagerly agreed to Makoto's request to share a toast, not even waiting for him to finish speaking. Was she afraid he would go find someone else to drink with, or was it because this shared toast was something she had been waiting for many years? My thoughts froze, and I only snapped back to reality when a colleague spoke again. Dr. Wong, are you still listening? I'll send you the address. I came to my senses and replied dryly. Something came up at home. I won't be coming. Enjoy yourselves. After hanging up, I stared at the darkened screen. My bitter and disheartened face reflected back at me. I sighed in silence. Maria and Makoto were having such a good time. What was the point of me getting involved and making things awkward? The next day, I went to work as usual. I didn't expect to be caught in traffic while taking David to kindergarten, forcing me to take a detour. I arrived at the hospital a few minutes later than usual. After clocking in, I was about to change clothes for a meeting when I turned and ran into Maria and Makoto. Seeing me still in my casual clothes, Maria, looking flustered and out of breath, immediately frowned. She started to reprimand me, saying, Why haven't you changed your clothes yet? You're usually punctual, but today is the meeting. Didn't you think of coming earlier? Her words reminded me of last night, and I felt a surge of frustration. I casually explained, I was taking the kid to school, and there was traffic. I was about to walk away to change, but Maria looked at my casual demeanor and furrowed her brow even more. Her voice grew colder. Don't use the child as an excuse. Your time management is the problem. If you had planned better, you wouldn't be running late. I stopped in my tracks. Her righteous tone only fueled my anger. I had always been the one to personally drop David off at school. Even if it meant working late or having surgery, I would ask a trusted parent to help. Maria had never once offered to help, so how dare she criticize me so self-righteously? I looked into her cold eyes and asked, Is this Maria's way of giving me advice on how to manage my life? Not to mention that I wasn't late, but even if I had been, what does it have to do with you? At my words, Maria's face darkened even more, and the air between us became thick with tension. Makoto quickly stepped in to smooth things over, his smile warm as he said, Dr. Wong, Maria understands how hard it is for you to raise a child alone. She might have spoken a bit harshly, so please don't take it personally. I was already angry, but hearing him call me Dr. Wong in that familiar tone only grated on my nerves. I couldn't help myself and snapped, Dr. Ito and Maria are so close, why bother coming to my department? Why not switch to the cardiothoracic department? Without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked away, heading to change clothes for the meeting. This meeting was primarily about discussing surgery for a new patient with dilated cardiomyopathy, which required a joint effort from both cardiology and cardiothoracic departments. The cardiothoracic department had already confirmed that Maria would be the lead surgeon. The hospital director looked at me and asked, Who do you recommend for the cardiology side? Dr. Wong. I hesitated for a moment, looking at the young doctors under my wing, but in the end, I decided that I should step up. I was about to leave soon, so it would be a good opportunity to do one last surgery and pass on some experience to these young doctors. I looked at the director and said, "I'll do it." The director nodded, about to make the announcement, when I noticed Maria's brow twitch slightly. Her cold voice cut through the air. "No." I was taken aback. Looking at her in confusion, Maria's voice was icy as she added, "I don't think someone who is late to work can be counted on to perform rigorously in surgery. I don't agree with Dr. George being part of the operation." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I had been a doctor for so many years, and there had never been a mistake in any of my surgeries. Maria knew this. Why was she refusing to let me take part? My eyes darkened, and I was about to respond when Maria added, "I recommend Dr. Makoto as my assistant." Chapter 6. Maria spoke these words gently, looking at Makoto with eyes full of affection. My chest tightened, and the words I wanted to say caught in my throat. I understood now. Maria wasn't really concerned about my shortcomings. She just wanted to use this opportunity to give Makoto a chance to shine. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. She was willing to step on me to help Makoto climb higher. The director hesitated but ultimately agreed to Maria's request. After the meeting, the director asked me to stay behind. He said, "I know you mean well, wanting to give them an example to follow, but ultimately, experience is the best teacher. If we don't let them take the lead, how can they improve?" He patted me on the shoulder and said, "Now that you're leaving, Makoto is the most qualified to take over. He deserves a chance." I knew the director was right. Makoto was well versed in theory and had extensive clinical experience abroad. He had just returned and needed time to adjust. I sighed and nodded. "I understand." As I followed the director out of the conference room, I ran into Maria. She seemed to be waiting at the door. When she saw me talking to the director, she asked, "What did the director say?" I was still thinking about her words earlier and didn't want to respond. So I asked in return, "What do you need?" Maria seemed unconcerned by my lack of response and shifted her tone, speaking more gently. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have undermined you in front of everyone at the meeting." I was taken aback. Over the years, Maria had always been indifferent to me, even when we had conflicts. I was the one who apologized first. Why was she apologizing now? Before I could answer, Maria's low voice came again. "The collaboration was my idea, not Makoto's. Don't make things difficult for him." At her words, I looked at Maria in shock. So she had apologized because she didn't want me to make things difficult for Makoto. I clenched my hands in my sleeves, feeling bitter and sad. Did Maria really think I was the kind of person who would mix personal feelings with professional duties? I opened my mouth but couldn't say a word. Maria, seeing my silence, assumed I was still angry and softened her tone further, saying, "It was my fault. Please don't be upset. Tonight, I'll pick you and David up to go home. Okay?" I looked at her impatience and heard her words, which seemed almost condescending, and my frustration grew. I couldn't breathe. I clenched my fists and said, "No, we won't be coming back." Maria furrowed her brow, thinking I was just saying it out of anger. She reflexively asked, "Where else would you go if you're not coming home?" I looked at her, indifferent, and said, "That's your home, not." Before I could finish, Makoto rushed over, interrupting, "Maria, I've been looking for you. An emergency congenital heart disease patient just arrived. The situation is critical. You need to come take a look." Maria immediately agreed, left a quick message with the address, and hurried away. I watched her rush off, sighing quietly. I wasn't going to tell her the address. We were already divorced, and that was my and David's home, not hers. In the following days, the cardiothoracic department was busy, and Maria practically lived at the hospital. She never mentioned us coming back. I didn't have to explain. I just went about my day as usual, picking up David and living a peaceful life. Then, with just 10 days left before I left, I was packing David's things when I realized I had left my passport at the old house. Since I had the day off, I took David back to retrieve it, but when I opened the door, I saw several pairs of men's shoes by the shoe cabinet and men's coats hanging on the rack. A bad feeling rose in my chest. The next second, the bedroom door opened, and Makoto, in his pajamas, walked out, looking disoriented. He paused when he saw us and asked, "Dr. Wong, what are you doing here?" I was speechless. Chapter 7. I looked at Makoto, who appeared to be in charge, and instinctively clenched my hand. It wasn't until the next moment that I snapped back to reality, forcing a smile and lowering my gaze to hide the redness in my eyes. I explained. Maria asked me to help her pick something up. With that, I took the documents from the drawer under the coffee table and was about to lead David out, but Makoto stopped me, his voice tinged with concern. "Dr. Wong, Maria and I." Before he could finish, I cut him off. "Don't worry, Dr. Ito. I won't say anything to anyone at the hospital." With that, I walked out. I took a deep breath once I was downstairs, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. No wonder Maria never brought up asking David and me to return. It wasn't that she had forgotten because of work, but rather because our departure suited her just fine. I unconsciously tightened my grip until David started struggling in pain. Only then did I snap back to reality. I hurriedly loosened my hold and squatted down to apologize. Sorry, David. Daddy was lost in thought. I didn't mean to hurt you. David shook his head, just staring at me, and asked, Dad, is that my mom's boyfriend? Is he going to be my new dad? Hearing his innocent words, my heart twisted with pain. I forced a smile and said, David, why would you think that? David, looking hurt, lowered his head and said, Luna's new mom lives with her and dad now, and sometimes she even picks her up from school. He frowned and threw himself into my arms, hugging me tightly, his voice fragile as he whispered, I don't want that man. I just want you, Daddy. His pure words made my heart ache, but also filled it with warmth. My throat tightened, and my voice trembled as I slowly embraced my little one tighter. I said, David, don't worry. There's no new daddy, just the two of us. I gently stroked David's head, my touch soft, both comforting him and steadying my own trembling heart. Tomorrow, I would go see the dean and apply to leave early. The cooling-off period for the divorce was over, and I had my divorce certificate. There was no reason to stay in this city anymore. The next morning, I knocked on the dean's office door. I said, Dean, I'm applying to leave today and go to the US to settle down. The dean looked at my determined eyes and didn't stop me. He only said, the surgery for the heart enlargement patient is scheduled for today. If you have time, could you keep an eye on it? I was momentarily stunned, thinking about how Maria had once undermined me during a meeting, and my instinct was to refuse. But this was Makoto's first time in the operating room, and I couldn't rest easy about the patient's safety. So, I stopped hesitating, changed into my scrubs, and walked into the observation room. I watched Makoto's skilled movements, constantly monitoring the heart monitor and giving updates on the patient's condition. Quietly relieved, Makoto really was highly skilled. After I left, he would be able to carry the cardiology department on his shoulders. I could rest assured now. Once the worry lifted from my chest, I noticed the seamless cooperation between Maria and Makoto. It was as if the years Makoto had been gone were nothing but a distant illusion. They were as close as they had been in school, communicating with just a glance. I paused. If this had been before, I would have been overwhelmed with bitterness. But now, I simply turned my gaze away. Ever since I saw Makoto moving into Maria's house yesterday, I had stopped caring entirely. I was leaving anyway. What did it matter what Maria and Makoto were doing? After the surgery, I left first, changed, and headed back to my office to pack. Dr. Wong, a familiar voice called out, making me pause mid-step. I turned to see Maria, her brow furrowed. With a low, probing voice, she asked, Did you go home yesterday? Chapter 8. I found Maria's questioning tone somewhat amusing. That place had been my home for 5 years. Did I really need to report back to her every time I went there? But I couldn't be bothered to engage in a lengthy conversation with her, so I swallowed my sharp retort, nodded, and said, just going back to grab something. My cold and indifferent response only made Maria furrow her brows deeper, and a strange feeling rose in my chest. If this were before, I would have been furious to see someone else in my home and would have confronted her immediately. Why was I so calm now? But after a brief hesitation, she finally explained. Makoto's house had some plumbing issues, so I let him stay here temporarily. I looked at her, noticing the flicker in her eyes, and instantly knew her words didn't ring true. If he were just staying here temporarily, why was he in the master bedroom and not the guest room? I lowered my gaze and let out a soft laugh. Just as I was about to speak, I heard Makoto's voice calling out to her, Maria, the post-surgery meeting is starting. Hurry up. Maria immediately shifted her attention, nodded, and without waiting for me to respond, continued giving instructions. You and David stay here for 3 more days. Makoto will leave after that, and I'll come to pick you both up. With that, she didn't wait for my reply and hurried into the meeting room. I watched her disappear into the hallway, and after a long while, I sighed, letting out the breath I had been holding. Maria wouldn't be able to find us. I had already changed my flight, and tomorrow, David and I would fly to Boston, USA. I pulled my gaze away and, with no lingering attachment, walked back to my office to pack my things. A number of familiar doctors and nurses were surprised to hear that I was leaving. They asked, why so suddenly? You're off to study in the US. We didn't even hear a word about it. I smiled at their curious expressions and casually replied, David's mother is going to the US for work, and I'm planning to further my studies, so I'll go with her. I can't let my child be separated from his mother for too long. They nodded in understanding, some expressing regret. That makes sense. It's tough for the child, but you have to do what's best for him. I smiled faintly, then changed the topic. This potted succulent is for the head nurse. She's been under a lot of pressure, so I thought it might cheer her up. These banners should be hung in the department as a reminder for future doctors to always remember their mission and live up to the patients' and their families' expectations. I handed out everything I couldn't take with me to my colleagues, until I paused at the sight of the fountain pen on my desk, one I had used for a long time. For the first time, I hesitated. It was a gift from Maria. Maria had always been indifferent and rarely celebrated any holidays, let alone anniversaries. This pen had been a gift from her when I first joined the Capital Central Hospital. I had treasured it deeply and used it with great care. But now, I looked at the pen, suppressing the softness in my heart, and without further hesitation, I handed it to the head nurse, asking her to pass it on to Maria. I said, "This is my parting gift for her, to thank her for the years we worked together. I wish her all the best and hope her future is filled with success." After bidding farewell to my colleagues, I packed up my luggage and took David with me. I also called a courier to deliver the divorce certificate to Maria's home. By the time I finished everything, it was already late at night. David slept soundly, but I couldn't fall asleep. I sat on the balcony, staring out into the dark night, scrolling through my old chat history with Maria. I hadn't noticed before, but now I saw that the conversation was mostly just me talking to myself. I chuckled quietly, not feeling too sad. I paused for a moment, then decisively deleted Maria's contact information. A clean break, no turning back. Now, there were no more ties to hold me back. I could leave with peace of mind. By the time the sun rose, David and I were already on the plane to the United States. David stared at the blue sky and white clouds for a long time before turning to ask, "Daddy, are we in the sky?" I smiled at his innocent expression and nodded. "Yes, we're flying to America to start a new life. Are you excited, David?" The little guy nodded without hesitation, his eyes shining brightly as he said, "I'm happy, as long as I'm with Daddy, I'm happy." I couldn't help but ruffle his hair, my voice soft as I replied, "Daddy's happy too, as long as I'm with David. Daddy's happy." As soon as I finished speaking, the plane broke through the clouds, and the bright sunlight immediately filled the cabin. I felt the warmth of the sunlight on my face, as though a surge of strength had filled my body. It was as if all the confusion and pain had come to an end in that moment. The future was bright, full of possibilities. Chapter 9. On the other side, Maria had just returned to her office after getting off the operating table. There were several missed calls on her phone. She hesitated for a moment, about to call back, when Makoto knocked on the door. He said, "Maria, thanks for letting me stay these days. The house repairs are done ahead of schedule. I moved my things out at noon. You don't have to sleep in the office anymore. You can finally go home and get a good night's sleep." He flashed a bright smile and took a potted succulent from behind his back, placing it on Maria's desk. "Here, this is a little gift to thank you." Maria pursed her lips, instinctively wanting to refuse, but looking at the small, delicate succulent. For some reason, David came to her mind. Did I ever tell her that David likes succulents? Maria hesitated for a moment but ended up accepting it. She said, "I'll accept this, but the plants you asked me to take care of, you can take those back, right?" She gestured toward the mismatched plants in her office. Those were the plants that Makoto had almost killed. When he realized they were withering, he asked her for help. Thinking she had taken plant care courses in college, Maria had firmly refused, saying, "I'm a doctor of humans, not of plants." But during a routine checkup, she had found several sickly plants in her office. Makoto even put up signs on them that read, "Please, Maria, work your magic." She sighed and reluctantly took them in. After nearly a month of care, she had finally managed to save those plants from dying. Makoto looked at the now thriving plants and beamed. "Maria, I knew I was right about you." He smiled and gave her a thumbs up, praising, "Maria, you truly are a miracle worker." Saying this, he carefully picked up the plants and turned to leave her office. Just before walking out, he suddenly remembered something and turned back. "Oh, by the way, there was a package this morning. I signed for it and left it on the coffee table for you." Maria immediately thought of the missed calls, so it was about the package. But then, she furrowed her brows. She hadn't ordered anything recently, and everything in the house had been bought by me. The calls were made to my number, so why would they be calling her? Maria felt confused. It was already time to leave for the day, so she changed clothes and called my phone. She had intended to tell me that she'd be picking up David and me, but all she heard on the other end was the cold, robotic voice. "The number you have dialed is unavailable. Please try again later." Maria's heart sank. Something didn't feel right. Our phones had to be available 24/7 in case of emergencies. How could my phone be off? The more she thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Hanging up, she headed straight to my office, but when she got there, the office was shrouded in darkness, the door was locked, and the lights were off. The string of unusual occurrences made Maria's brow furrow even deeper. Her heart skipped a beat, and a wave of unease washed over her. As she passed the nurse's station, she quickly stopped the head nurse, who was a close colleague of mine, and asked, Where's Dr. Wang? The next words froze Maria in place. The head nurse replied, Dr. Wang resigned. Didn't you know, Maria? A crack appeared in Maria's typically indifferent expression, and a hint of shock flickered in her normally calm eyes. She asked, when did this happen? Her voice trembled, as if in disbelief. The head nurse, who had never seen Maria like this, paused for a moment before snapping out of it. Just yesterday, she said, then seemed to remember something, pulling out a pen. Oh, Dr. Wang asked me to give this to you, she said, handing Maria the pen. He said this is a farewell gift for you, to thank you for all the years of working together, and to wish you success in everything moving forward. Chapter 10. Maria stared at the familiar pen in her hand, lost in thought for a moment. It was the same pen I had given her as a welcome gift when she started working. She still remembered the excitement on my face at the time, the depth in my eyes shining with a light she had never seen before. I had carefully wrapped the gift in my arms and gently nodded, saying, thank you, I'll be a good doctor. Years had passed, and every time Maria saw me use that pen, she would remember the gleam in my eyes. But now, as she listened to the head nurse's words, her heart suddenly twisted. She murmured to herself, may all your wishes come true. Maria's eyes darkened, and she pursed her lips. With the strange actions I had taken recently, she barely needed to think to understand why I had said those words. I had probably thought she still had feelings for Makoto, which was why I had left without a word. Maria's heart filled with anger, and her hands tightened into fists. She couldn't understand how I could just leave without discussing it with her first. If I had only asked, she could have explained everything. How did it come to this? Maria's frustration surged, like a volcano waiting to erupt. The head nurse, startled, stepped back, unsure of why she was so angry. Before she could speak, Maria asked, did Dr. Wang say where he was going? The nurse quickly nodded and replied, Dr. Wang said his wife is going on business to the U.S., and he's going with her. His wife? Maria's hand tightened even further as she almost laughed bitterly. She had no idea I was going to the U.S. on business. Her mind spun as she was nearly overwhelmed by anger, almost forgetting that it had been her own wish not to let anyone know they were married. She closed her eyes, trying to suppress the cold aura she was emitting, and forced down her fury about my sudden departure. With a quick turn, she left for home. She convinced herself that I was just upset and had gone to the U.S. in a huff, but that in a few days, I would return. After all, we were already married, and no matter what, I would come back. With that thought, Maria drove home. When she arrived, she noticed that it seemed Makoto had arranged for cleaning staff before he left. The house was spotless, almost like a newly decorated home. Normally, she would have felt comforted by such a clean and minimalist space, but now, it suddenly felt empty, as if the house had always been hers alone, with neither me nor David. Maria frowned. The anger that had been simmering during her drive had cooled, but now, seeing the emptiness of the house, confusion swept over her once again. She felt an unusual sense of unease. Perhaps she should take some time off and go to the U.S. to find me and David. With that thought, Maria walked over to the coffee table and reached under it, pulling out the bag that contained her important documents. She was about to grab her passport when she saw two papers inside the bag. One was in English, a letter of admission from Harvard Medical School. The other was in Chinese, a divorce agreement. Maria's heart sank. She stared at the name George Wang written in the student section of the letter and at the two signed names at the bottom of the divorce agreement. She stood frozen for a while. Then, almost self-mockingly, she let out a bitter smile. I hadn't gone abroad for a vacation. I had gone to study, and I had tricked her into signing the divorce agreement, not intending to come back. If she wasn't mistaken, the document had been sent by me, and inside was the divorce certificate. Shaking, she opened the envelope. Sure enough, everything was just as she had feared. As she looked at the documents and certificates on the table, Maria felt as though a cold wind had enveloped her heart, numbing the pain that rushed through her. So, George had just left. Maria smiled bitterly, covering her face with her hand. All her emotions were hidden behind a long, drawn-out sigh. She murmured softly, George. Her voice, filled with sorrow, echoed in the empty house, but it was destined to receive no answer. Chapter 11. Maria's pain, regret, and inner struggle were all things I knew nothing about. At this moment, I was at the San Francisco airport, waiting for my connecting flight. David, small and on his first international flight, was feeling miserable after the long hours in the air. His pale little face was scrunched up in discomfort, which made my heart ache. At least I was relieved that I had booked business class for the whole trip. If we had been in economy, cramped and stuffy, David would have been even more uncomfortable. So, during the layover, I decided to take David to a burger joint he had been craving. The place was packed, with almost no empty tables. I scanned the room and spotted an empty seat in the corner. Even though there was already a child sitting at the table, I figured I would give it a try and walked over to ask, "Excuse me, Is it okay if I sit here? Before I could finish my sentence, the person across from me looked up. That's when I saw the golden hair beneath her hoodie and her amber-colored eyes. The girl had fair skin and facial features so striking she seemed like she might be of mixed descent. I froze for a moment, thinking that this seat was probably taken by her family, and I was about to apologize and leave, but she met my gaze and, with a distant expression, nodded slightly. I quickly thanked her and sat down with David. Though the girl seemed aloof, her body language suggested she was not entirely unfriendly. I briefly entertained the thought, but soon dismissed it. I placed our order, and watched as David eagerly devoured his burger, looking more like himself again, his energy returning. That eased some of the guilt I had felt for putting him through the long, bumpy flight. At least he seemed better now, and that took a load off my conscience. I wiped the ketchup off his face, and was about to turn back to my meal when I noticed the girl was watching us. I blinked in surprise, meeting her gaze. I asked, "Is something wrong?" She shook her head, offering no reply, instead grabbing a napkin to wipe her nose before quickly turning her gaze elsewhere. I didn't think much of it. Her brief glance seemed tinged with a faint sadness, but there was no malice in it. It seemed more like a nostalgic feeling. I couldn't help but wonder if it was seeing how David and I were together that made her miss her own parents. I glanced at her again, sitting alone in the crowded restaurant, isolated from the surrounding bustle. My heart softened unexpectedly. Ever since becoming a father, I found myself paying more attention to children around me. While I was lost in thought, David suddenly stopped eating and exclaimed in surprise, snapping me back to reality. "Dad, look at her." I turned and saw the girl's face flush red, her brows furrowed, and her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. It was asthma. I immediately felt a jolt of panic. The girl was struggling to reach her bag on the suitcase. Without thinking, I stood up and quickly opened the bag to retrieve the medication. It took no more than 5 seconds. I watched as the girl used the inhaler, her breathing gradually returning to normal. Only then did I feel my heart relax. I asked David to get a paper cup, and I poured her some water. I said, "After using the inhaler, be sure to rinse your mouth to avoid side effects." The girl looked at me quietly, then nodded seriously, taking the water from my hands. Seeing that she was okay now, and that David had finished his meal, I noticed it was almost time for our flight. I planned to leave, but just as I was about to stand, the girl stopped me, writing something in my palm. "Thank you." I froze. Not only was I surprised that she couldn't speak, but I was also shocked to see that she had written 2 Chinese characters. So, she was Chinese. I clenched my fist, suddenly feeling a little embarrassed about the English I had spoken earlier. It was oddly amusing to me now. I smiled to myself, shaking my head and replying, "It's nothing. Meeting like this is fate. If it's meant to be, we'll meet again." With that, I turned and left. I thought nothing more of it, treating it as a minor encounter. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. In the cabin, I saw the same golden-haired girl again. Chapter 12. It was the flight attendant who asked me during boarding if the seat next to me was for an unaccompanied minor. She asked if I was okay with it, and if not, she would try to arrange a different seat for me. I shook my head and said I didn't mind. The next moment, I saw the golden-haired girl walking into the cabin. When she saw me, her eyes lit up for a moment, and she gave me a small nod as a greeting. Then, guided by the flight attendant, she sat down next to me. I smiled to myself, thinking how funny this coincidence was. We had just been at the same table in the restaurant, and now we were sitting next to each other. Just as I was marveling at how fate works, David tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Dad, is this the little girl who's sitting alone on the plane?" This was the explanation I had just given David about unaccompanied minors. I glanced at the golden-haired girl, who seemed not to hear him, and sighed in relief. I answered David, "Yes, she's flying alone. Isn't that impressive?" At this age, children tend to be strong, and I didn't want David to feel sorry for her or hurt her pride. Besides, I didn't think it was something to pity. She was clearly capable and independent. David nodded enthusiastically, looking at the girl with admiration. "Wow, that's so cool." He then rummaged through his little bag and pulled out a packet of candy, offering it to the girl. "Here, sister, have some candy." This was David's favorite candy, and he only shared it with people he liked. The girl looked at the candy that had suddenly appeared in front of her, then turned to look at David. Their eyes met, bright and sincere, and she paused for a moment. I quietly observed the interaction between the 2 children without intervening. After a brief hesitation, the girl accepted the candy. David's face lit up with a big smile. "Since you took my candy, we're friends now. You have to teach me how to fly alone. I want to be as cool as you." The girl lowered her gaze, as if a little embarrassed by his words. Before David could say more, I quickly interrupted, worried that his enthusiasm might bother her. "The plane's about to take off. Let's sit properly." The hours of flight passed quickly. I kept an eye on David, but I also found myself distracted by the golden-haired girl. She was very well behaved, listening to music with her headphones on, quietly writing and drawing in her notebook. I had been concerned about her asthma, but it seemed she hadn't had any problems. By the time we arrived in Boston, it was already the afternoon in the US. After picking up our checked luggage, I was about to say goodbye to the girl when I saw David holding her hand. Unwilling to let go, he asked, "Sister, I still don't know your name." For some reason, David seemed very attached to her. I was about to tell David to let go when the girl smiled. Her usual distant demeanor softened, and for a moment, she seemed more like a child. She crouched down and handed me a note. She seemed to worry that David wouldn't understand, so she asked me to read it out loud. Anna Lou. I read the name slowly. David repeated it, then smiled and said, "Then I'll call you Anna from now on." Before he could finish, a deep voice suddenly called out, "Anna." Chapter 13. I froze for a moment, watching as Anna paused and turned toward the source of the voice. A woman in a white dress appeared, tall and slender with delicate features. Her demeanor was warm, yet there was a trace of coldness about her, much like Anna. She walked gracefully toward us, gently taking Anna's luggage. "Thank you for not being late. I've been waiting for you since the meeting ended." Anna looked up at her and nodded slightly, revealing a hint of childish innocence. I assumed the woman was Anna's mother, given their striking resemblance, and I nodded in acknowledgement. I then turned to David and said, "Anna's family is here to pick her up. Say goodbye to her now." David bit his lip, his eyes full of reluctance. He stared at Anna for a long time before finally managing to say, "Goodbye, sister." Anna hesitated for a moment, then took out the notebook she had been writing and drawing in during the flight. She tore off 2 pages and handed them to David. She looked at the woman beside her and gestured with sign language, asking her to translate. The woman nodded and said, "These are drawings Anna made of you and David. She wants to thank you for your help on the way here." I looked at the drawings in David's hands, though there were only a few strokes. They captured our expressions vividly. The lines were smooth, showing that Anna had been in a good mood while drawing. I smiled and said, "Thank you, I'll keep them safe." Anna nodded and signed something else, which the woman translated. "Anna wants to know if she can have your contact information." Of course, I nodded. Since we were new to the area and David had made a good friend, I didn't want him to lose contact with her. I was about to grab a piece of paper to write down my phone number and name when the woman handed me her phone. "Anna lives with me. You can be saved in my phone." I nodded and saved the contact. After doing so, I hesitated before asking, "Miss Lou's number?" The woman smiled at my polite formality, and the distant air she had earlier seemed to melt away, making her feel more approachable, like warm jade. "Don't be so formal. Just call me Willow." I looked at the name card she gave me and was surprised to see her background. "You graduated from Harvard Medical School?" Willow nodded, surprised by my reaction. "Why?" she asked. I smiled, feeling the coincidence of the situation. "I'm a new student at the medical school." Our eyes met, and we both couldn't help but laugh. "Well, that's truly a coincidence," she said. Willow's smile was warm, and her aloofness seemed to melt away. She asked, "Where are you heading? Let me give you a ride." Anna raised an eyebrow at this, a thoughtful expression flickering in her eyes. I was about to politely refuse, not wanting to trouble them, when David tugged at my sleeve. With his big, pleading eyes, he looked up at me and said, "I want to spend more time with Anna." I froze, feeling awkward, but Anna, without a word, took David's hand and led him away, effectively blocking my refusal. Willow laughed softly, reaching for my luggage. I rarely see Anna so proactive. "Let me give you a ride as a thank you for taking care of her." I reluctantly agreed. Looking at the orange-red sky outside the airport, I felt a little of the travel fatigue lift. The start of this new life didn't seem so bad after all. Chapter 14. By the time we settled into the house, it was already evening. I was still reflecting on today's strange experience when David tugged at the hem of my shirt. "Dad, I'm tired," he said, on the way back. I let him run around and release some energy, thinking it would help with jet lag. Sure enough, after dinner, he started complaining about being tired, and now his eyes were barely open. I hurriedly took him to wash up, laid out his bed, and tucked him in. Before he fell asleep, he managed to keep his eyes half open, asking, "Dad, when can I go play with Anna again?" I was taken aback for a moment, then replied, "We can message Anna tomorrow and ask when you can play together." "Okay." David nodded contentedly and quickly drifted off to sleep. As I watched his peaceful face, a light sigh escaped me. In my heart, I was uneasy. We had just moved from the familiar environment David had lived in for 5 years to this unfamiliar city. Would he be able to adapt? Would he feel nervous or out of place? But as I looked at him now, though tired, there was no sign of impatience or fear. He even made a new friend voluntarily. That eased my heart a little. I gently tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Don't worry, David. Dad will take good care of you." Just then, my phone lit up. It was a call from Maria. It had only been 2 days, but seeing her name now felt like a lifetime ago. Filled with a strange sense of unfamiliarity, I felt my heart sink. Without hesitation, I hung up the phone and added her to the blacklist. Since I had decided to cut ties completely, I didn't want her to affect my thoughts anymore. The days passed smoothly and uneventfully. David and I stayed in a small house my parents had bought when they were living in the US. The decor was a bit old, but it was convenient. It was close to my school, and only 2 blocks away from Willow's house. Since the farewell at the airport, the 2 children had become close, and their communication increased. I was particularly worried about David's language barrier. Even though he attended a bilingual kindergarten in China, I still worried about his ability to fit in here. Willow, however, took the initiative to offer David English lessons at her house. That was when I learned that Anna didn't have a speech delay due to any physical reason. It was trauma-induced, and she had been reluctant to speak. Willow said it was rare for Anna to be so interested in interacting with others, so she encouraged David to come over more often to play with her, while also helping Anna improve her English. Of course, I had no objections. After half a month of school, I was running around non-stop. If it weren't for Willow, I wouldn't have known how to take care of David. Sometimes, if I came back late, Willow would wait for us downstairs in the building with David. Like today, as soon as I walked out of the classroom, a little bundle of joy threw itself at my legs, shouting, "Dad." David had grown a bit taller and was wearing a fluffy hat with little dog ears, looking like a small samoyed. If he had a tail, it would probably wag off. He said, "I came to pick you up." I couldn't help but laugh at his excited eyes. "You've been hanging out with Aunt Willow again, haven't you?" David gave me a mischievous look and giggled. "Auntie said it's fine, so I came." I chuckled and tapped his nose before turning to Willow, who was standing beside us. I said, "Thank you, Professor Liu." Willow smiled, shaking her head, signaling that it was no trouble. She said, "Let's go home. It's on the way to pick up Anna from school." I nodded, taking David's hand as we walked side by side with her. I said, "I bought some beef. Anna really liked the borscht I made last time. How about I make it again today?" David interrupted, "What about me? I want egg tarts." Willow patted his head and said, "Already bought them. I'll bake them for you when we get home." Okay. David cheered, jumping in excitement. I smiled at David's lively and happy demeanor. It made me feel warm inside, knowing that he was adapting well. Suddenly, I heard a low, familiar voice calling my name. George. Chapter 15. I never imagined that the next time I would see Maria, it would be under such circumstances. Maria was wearing a trench coat, which made her look thin, like a cold snowflake in the middle of winter. She appeared without warning, drifting into my life again. I froze for a moment before snapping back to reality. Instinctively, I glanced down at David. His earlier laughter had disappeared, replaced with a pale face. David's tightly clenched hand reminded me he was scared. My heart sank. I immediately stepped in front of David, casting a displeased glance at Maria. "What are you doing here?" I asked. The divorce was final. She and Makoto could be together freely now. Why did she feel the need to appear before me? And without even saying a word, she frightened David. Maria, however, didn't respond directly to my question. Instead, her attention was entirely focused on Willow and me. She said, "You didn't bother to say goodbye before coming to America. Can't I come find you?" Maria's clenched hand in her coat sleeve and her brooding gaze fixed on Willow made it clear, had I really moved on so quickly? Was Willow the reason I had taken David to America? I didn't know what thoughts Maria had brewing in her mind, but I found her words absurd. "We're divorced. Where I go, it's none of your business," I said coldly. I picked up David, intending to leave. Willow silently followed us, stepping in line behind, but Maria grabbed my arm. The mention of divorce seemed to hit a nerve. Her usual composed demeanor faltered as she spoke in a voice full of emotion. "I didn't agree to the divorce. You." Before she could finish, I interrupted her sharply. "The agreement was signed. The divorce certificate is in hand. Whether you agree or not is irrelevant." Maria stiffened, her expression filled with disbelief. The gentle, patient husband she once knew seemed like a distant memory. Why had I turned so cold and distant? I didn't care about her feelings and tried to break free from her grip. But Maria, gripping my arm tightly, wouldn't let go. I couldn't shake her off, not with David in my arms. "Let go," I snapped. I felt David trembling in my arms, his fear so palpable that I urgently needed to find a safe place to calm him down. But Maria just wouldn't release her hold. Her eyes darkened, her grip as firm as iron. "I have something to say." Before Maria could finish her words, David suddenly lunged at her, biting down on her wrist. He bit down fiercely, and Maria let out a shocked cry, loosening her grip immediately. David stood between us, his little body shaking in fear, his eyes brimming with tears. "Let go of my dad," he said in a trembling voice. David's words echoed in the air, striking both Maria and me silent. I had always thought I had concealed my sadness well, But David was so perceptive. He had remembered everything. My heart felt both bitter and touched. I quickly embraced David, gently patting his back and soothing him. It's okay. It's okay. Don't cry, David. Maria, on the other hand, looked bewildered. New dad. Chapter 16. In the next moment, Maria immediately realized that it was probably the encounter with Makoto that led to the misunderstanding between us. Maria furrowed her brows, and despite the pain in her wrist, she tried to explain. I, however, coldly glanced at her and said, Maria, I don't want to see you again. With that, I picked up David and left. Maria tried to follow, but someone blocked her way. A cold voice rang out. Miss, George said he doesn't want to see you. Maria's heart sank as she turned to look at the woman who had just been smiling gently, but now her eyes, behind her glasses, were filled with coldness. Maria said, That's my husband and son. You have no right to stop me. Willow raised an eyebrow and smiled as she replied, If I understand correctly, you're already divorced. And her smile never reached her eyes, which remained icy as she continued. David himself said, You're not worthy of being her mother. Willow maliciously repeated it, as if driving a sharp blade straight into Maria's most vulnerable spot. Pain and anger spread through Maria, and she immediately gritted her teeth. She retorted, Who are you? What right do you have to interfere in my business? The words seemed to squeeze out between her clenched teeth, full of rage. Willow, however, seemed oblivious to the barely contained fury in Maria's voice. She added fuel to the fire. It's not interfering in your business. Her voice was light, her gaze falling on me, still holding David as I walked away. Maria understood the unspoken words immediately. Willow was doing this for me. Maria's heart sank even further, but before she could say anything, Willow gave her a sharp glance and said, Miss, you should head back. With that, she stepped forward and quickly caught up with me. All that was left was Maria, watching our retreating figures, her heart twisted with anger and frustration, as if a tight rope had been wrapped around her neck, suffocating her. That evening, perhaps it was Maria's appearance today that frightened David. He had been sticking to me, seeking reassurance. Normally, he would be clinging to Anna, asking her to draw or watch TV, but now, he didn't want to. He came home early with me instead. Willow asked, Did David get scared? Her eyes showed concern as she looked at David, who was still tightly holding on to me. She didn't ask any more questions, only seeing us off at the door, saying thoughtfully, If you need any help, just let me know. I'm always available. I gave her a grateful smile, nodded, and went inside. As soon as we entered the house, I was about to set David down. I had planned to say something, but David wouldn't let me leave. Clutching the hem of my shirt, he didn't say anything, just looked at me with his big, clear eyes. Those eyes were so pure and sincere, as if all his thoughts and attention were on me alone. Anyone would feel their heart soften looking at him. The words I had planned to say caught in my throat under his eager gaze. Looking at David, who seemed so insecure, I realized that Maria's sudden appearance today had deeply affected him. I knew that David was mature for his age. Even though he had known for a long time that I was upset because of Maria, he had been holding it in, not saying anything. As long as I was happy, he would endure the discomfort. Once I realized this, my heart ached even more. It was my fault that David, at such a young age, had to endure so much. Filled with guilt, I couldn't help but sigh softly and ask, David, do you not like her? I didn't say who she was, but David understood. He buried his soft face in my neck, his long eyelashes trembling before dropping, and quietly said, I don't like her. I pressed on. Is it because she doesn't let you call her mom? David trembled slightly, his voice shaky as he clung to me even tighter. When she came, I wanted to leave. I don't want to leave, Daddy. Chapter 17. Hearing David's words, I froze for a moment. I had never mentioned anything about sending him away in front of David. Why would he think that? Just as I was about to ask, David trembled even more, his voice tinged with a hint of crying. He said, Luna said after you and Mom get divorced, we'll take turns living in both houses. I don't want to go back. I don't want to leave, Daddy. Feeling the small body in my arms shake, I quickly held him tighter and comforted him. It's okay. David won't go anywhere. His choked sobs felt like a sword piercing my heart. A sour, painful sensation filled my chest, and a bitter taste spread through my heart. So, this was what David was afraid of. Feeling the wetness on my neck, I pulled back slightly and wiped away the sparkling tears from David's face. My gentle hand, filled with reassurance, softly patted his back, stroking it slowly. I said, Daddy won't let her take you away. My voice was firm, like an unmovable mountain. The words weren't just comfort, they felt like a promise. He said, David will always stay with Daddy. His soft voice echoed in the room, stopping David's tears and calming my heart. I gently wiped away the last of David's tears from his face, his eyes now clear. The next afternoon, I finished my class early and entrusted David to Willow before I removed Maria's number from the blacklist. I asked, "Do you have time? I want to talk to you." And so, we met in the park. The clear blue sky was dotted with white, gauzy clouds, while the pigeons in the square cooed and flapped their wings to fly. Nearby, the ground was covered in yellowed fallen leaves, warmed by the sunlight, creating a beautiful autumn scene. If you ignored the fact that I was sitting on the bench with Maria, we sat on the bench, with a natural distance between us. It was as if the gap between us, built up over the years, could never be crossed, nor erased. The autumn wind stirred the fallen leaves between us, only to return to stillness again. "You want to, I want to." We both spoke at the same time, then stopped. We exchanged a glance before looking away. I noticed the bandage peeking from her sleeve and asked, "Did David bite you hard?" David had a strong bite that day. I had only glanced at it briefly, but I saw the deep marks. Now, it should. Maria followed my gaze to her wrist, pulled her hand from her sleeve, and said, "It's nothing." After hesitating for a moment, she added, "David was upset. He bit me to vent." I understand. Hearing this, I looked at her, her lowered eyes calm, but I felt a complex mix of emotions. On one hand, I was surprised by how understanding Maria had become, suddenly explaining herself. On the other hand, I felt cold. Maria still didn't understand why David bit her. "It wasn't out of anger, but," I said, "David bit you because he was scared." Looking into Maria's puzzled eyes, I continued, my voice low. "He's afraid you'll take him away. He's afraid of living with your new dad, and never seeing me again." I explained it clearly, but Maria frowned. She asked, "What new dad?" Her eyes darkened. "Makoto and I are just colleagues. That time he was only staying temporarily. He moved out already." Before she could finish, my cold laugh interrupted her. I said, "Maria, I'm not blind. You've still got feelings for him after all these years. Don't think I don't know." Chapter 18. My voice was full of suppressed anger. After I blurted out those words, I clenched my fists, regaining my composure. I said, "You kept our marriage secret, made David call you aunt, all to create a single persona, waiting for him to return so you could chase him again. Right, then you rented him a place, took care of plants, had a toast with him, even offered to do surgery together, and let him stay at our house." The more I spoke, the calmer my tone became. I looked at Maria, my words cold as I asked, "Do you really expect me to believe you had no ulterior motives in any of this?" Maria's frown deepened as my cold gaze hit her. It felt like those calm statements were sharp blades, stabbing her deeply. She instinctively wanted to explain, but the words stopped before they left her mouth. Maria couldn't bring herself to say she had no personal feelings toward him, because deep down, she knew she did. After all, she had once liked him, and had sunk into depression when he left, but when she saw him again, she felt nothing. Maria's heart was full of me. She thought of the gentle, passionate, caring version of me from the past, the one who would wait for her to come home, secretly bring her food, help her iron clothes, and remind her to take vitamins on time. These thoughtful gestures warmed her heart, and she couldn't help but be moved, thinking that with a little more time, she could. Maria looked at me, paused, and then spoke. "I did take care of him, but it was because he was my classmate. I didn't have any special feelings for him. All that's in the past now. I know your feelings for me. Why can't you wait a little longer? Give me some time, and I'll be able to return your feelings." Maria had never been so eager before, wanting to express her feelings and make me understand her intentions. But once she said it, all that was left was the autumn wind sweeping up the fallen leaves, and the emptiness between us. I looked at Maria's furrowed brow and the hidden urgency in her eyes. A small smile appeared in my heart. If this were before, I would have felt some stirrings hearing Maria's guilty confessions and passionate declarations. But now, there was nothing. It was as if I was watching a one-man show from outside the screen, unable to feel anything. There was only one question on my mind, and I asked, "Why should I wait for you?" I saw Maria's usual indifferent expression turn into one of shock and disbelief. As I smiled brightly, like the sun, I said, "I've already spent 5 years on you. Why should I wait for you?" Maria's heart trembled. She had always been in control of the situation between us, used to her high status, believing I would accept everything she did. But now, she had forgotten. I said, "I get tired too, Maria." I stood up, looking down at the defeated Maria. It felt as though the balance of power between us had shifted in that moment. The one who hoped for tenderness, who was weak and wanted a little care, was now Maria. Her heart sank as if everything had slipped out of her grasp, leaving her uneasy and lost. In the next moment, I said, "Your response came too late. I don't need it anymore." Those words fell like a death sentence, and Maria's eyes trembled. She immediately stood up, wanting to grab me. She said, "No, I want to." Before her hand could touch my sleeve, I took a step back. The gap between us grew even wider, like a thunderous fire, and Maria could no longer take another step. I said, "This is it, Maria." I pronounced the final judgment, and said, "This is the best ending for us." Chapter 19. Maria still wanted to speak, but without hesitation. I turned and began to walk away. She almost panicked, trembling as she called out, "George, you can't do this." Seeing me pause in my steps, she took a breath and said, "David is also my child. He can't be without a mother." The moment the words left her mouth, I raised my eyes and glanced at her. That look of mine seemed filled with mockery and disdain, freezing Maria's heart in place, leaving her awkward and ashamed. Indeed, what right did she have to say such things? She had a grudge against me and didn't want David to call her Mom. Clearly, it was her. At that moment, guilt and regret flooded my chest. The sun had somehow slipped behind the clouds, and a biting chill from the autumn wind swept through the air. The fallen leaves rustled, almost as if mocking Maria's belated realization. She stared at me, her body swaying as if all her strength had drained away. She almost couldn't stand. I looked at the deep remorse in her eyes, my emotions too complex to put into words. After a pause, I said, "I won't block your number anymore. If you want to see David, just call me. As long as David is willing, I won't stop you from seeing him. Consider it my final gesture of goodwill toward you." After speaking, I focused my gaze on Maria's cold, stern face. My eyes were probing, not with reluctance, but as though I was looking through her to someone else. I was looking at the Maria I knew in college, the one I had loved throughout my entire university years, the one I desperately tried to get closer to, the one I gave up so much of myself for, but there was nothing. Through her cold eyes, all I saw was my own reflection. I suddenly understood, and with a relieved smile, I turned away without looking back. Maria had always been indifferent, slow to react. Even if she was willing to accept me now, it was only because it had become second nature. The person I once blindly and recklessly loved, the one I regarded as a standard to strive for, had only been a figment of my own fantasy. I didn't look back, only feeling the autumn breeze on my face, my heart light and free. It was over. The feelings that had lingered from my student days until now had finally dissipated with the autumn wind. By the time I reached Willow's house, night had already fallen. I said, "Sorry I'm late." I gave Willow, who was holding a sleeping David, an apologetic smile. She shook her head and smiled warmly, saying, "It's okay." I thanked her and was about to take David from her when I noticed he was tightly gripping Willow's collar, unwilling to let go. I felt a bit awkward, about to wake David so he would release her, but Willow kindly stopped me. She said, "He just fell asleep. If you move him now, he'll wake up. Let him sleep here with me." I hesitated for a moment and then nodded. Because of Maria's unexpected visit, David hadn't slept well the previous night. Not only did he cling to my hand, but he also kept frowning. Now that he was peacefully sleeping in Willow's arms, it was for the best. I watched David's calm, serene face as he slept soundly in Willow's arms, sighing softly. Willow, seeing the gloom lift from my expression, her eyes filled with a sense of relief, guessed, "Is it all settled?" I nodded, saying, "We talked everything through." I gently stroked David's head, my voice soft as I said, "David and I will always be together. We won't be separated." Willow nodded lightly, her voice gentle as she added, "He'll be worried when he wakes up and doesn't see you tonight. Let him rest here." Her warm gaze fell lovingly on David, with the soft golden glow from the wall lamps casting their light behind her. She looked like a graceful, caring mother. Chapter 20. As Willow had predicted, David woke up several times that night. He was scared at first, seeing the unfamiliar surroundings, but when he turned his head and saw me sleeping beside him, he immediately felt at ease. He buried his face in my chest and quickly fell back into a deep sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I found David in my arms. His small body was curled up like a shrimp, his hand resting on mine, sleeping as soundly as a little baby. I couldn't help but laugh quietly. I had intended to let him sleep longer, but my arm, which had gone numb from the awkward position, urged me to get up. After I finished washing up and came out, Willow was already awake. "Good morning," she said, handing me a cup of milk. I massaged my arm, smiling as I replied, "Good morning." The cup of milk was warm to the touch, and for a moment, I paused. I chuckled and said, "After being in the US for so long, I'm getting used to drinking ice water." My voice was light-hearted, and I took a sip of the milk. The warm liquid flowed through me, comforting my body in a way that made me feel nourished. Willow smiled at my comment but then glanced down at my other arm. She asked with concern, "Does your arm hurt?" I hadn't expected her to notice such a small detail, so I didn't hide anything. I nodded and said, "It's a bit numb from being pressed all night." I spoke casually, not overly concerned. It was just the usual numbness and pain from not moving for too long, and it would pass if I stayed still for a while. I thought about it and set the milk down, intending to head to the kitchen to make breakfast for the kids. But just as I was about to leave, Willow reached out and grabbed my wrist. I turned back, confused, and asked, "What's wrong?" Willow didn't answer right away. Instead, she gave me a look, then gently placed her fingertips on my arm. Her touch was cool, almost as if she were absent-mindedly massaging my arm, but each movement seemed to target the painful, numb spots. I instinctively tried to pull away, but Willow was quick. She held my arm firmly and softly said, "Don't move." Our proximity felt too close, and her quiet command seemed to echo in my ear. I froze, as if time had stopped. I wanted to say something, but before I could, Willow applied more pressure and added, "This will help your blood circulation." I watched her intently as she focused on my arm, looking as serious as if she were conducting a study. I silently closed my mouth. The tingling, painful sensation in my arm gradually faded, and I could clearly feel Willow's movements. Her cool fingers massaged pressure points on my arm, and her warm palms would sometimes cover it, pressing gently. This massage really was improving the circulation. I couldn't help but agree. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to explain why my ears had turned red without me even realizing it. Seeing Willow's serious expression, I hurriedly spoke up. "It's already better." Willow nodded, releasing her hold. She then reminded me, "Next time, don't let David sleep on your arm. It's uncomfortable when it gets numb." I lowered my head and nodded in agreement. We were about to head to the kitchen to make breakfast for the kids, but as I moved, I saw Anna standing across from us. Her bright blonde hair framed her face, and her indifferent eyes were fixed on us, though I couldn't tell for how long. I didn't know why, but I suddenly felt a little awkward. Although nothing had happened between Willow and me, we had been close together, and I feared Anna might misunderstand. I instinctively opened my mouth to explain, but Willow spoke first, saying, "Anna, go wake up David." Anna's expression remained calm as she nodded and walked toward the guest room. I felt uneasy and turned to Willow, asking, "Should we explain things to Anna? I'm afraid she might misunderstand." Willow asked, "Misunderstand what?" She seemed confused. I hastily replied, "She saw her mother so close to a man. What if she thinks too much about it?" At that, Willow furrowed her brows slightly. Her expression puzzled. She asked, "When did I say I'm Anna's mother?" Chapter 21. It wasn't until breakfast was finished that I snapped out of my shock and came to a realization. Willow was Anna's aunt. Anna's silence wasn't because she couldn't speak, it was because she had witnessed the tragic deaths of her parents and younger brother in a fire, leaving her with post-traumatic stress, which had robbed her of her voice. I only then understood. After spending so much time with Willow, I had never once asked about her relationship with Anna. I had just assumed they were mother and daughter. I had seen how Willow single-handedly raised Anna and her brother, always so considerate, never mentioning her partner. It turned out I had been overthinking things. I couldn't help but laugh at myself for being so naive. At that moment, I was on my way home. Willow was taking Anna to her art class, and since it was on the way, we were walking together. When she saw me laughing, she asked, "What's so funny?" I shook my head, brushing away my previous thoughts. I glanced at the two children ahead, playing and chasing each other on their skateboards, and casually said, "Just watching them having fun." Anna was skating ahead. Then she turned around to look at David. David's eyes lit up with excitement as he saw her graceful figure. He immediately ran after her, shouting, "I want to skate too. Anna, teach me, teach me." Anna steadied his skateboard and gently pushed it forward, allowing him to glide on his own for a while. David didn't realize it was Anna pushing him. He thought he was doing it himself. He clapped his hands in joy, delighted by how fun it was. I couldn't help but smile as I watched. It was such a warm moment. Willow noticed my gaze and followed it, her expression softening as she watched Anna's lively presence. She recalled when she had first seen Anna at her brother's funeral. Back then, Anna had been thin and distant, almost like a hollow, unfeeling figure. She had numbly observed the funeral proceedings, her face not changing at all. Willow had asked Anna if she wanted to come live in the US with her, but Anna had shaken her head, as though it took a long time for her to process the question. That had been the first time Willow had seen any emotion from Anna, a sudden, unanticipated tear running down her face as she gazed at the photo of her family on the memorial table. Willow's heart had clenched. She had gently wiped the tear away. She had known then that Anna couldn't bear to leave, so Willow hadn't insisted on bringing Anna with her right away. Instead, she let her stay with relatives on her father's side. Despite her busy schedule, Willow made sure to visit every month, but last month, when her relatives had twins, they simply no longer had the capacity to care for Anna. That's when Willow had bought the ticket to bring Anna back. However, she couldn't fly herself and was unable to accompany her. The relatives, too, were unwilling to go through the trouble of escorting Anna, so she had to book an unaccompanied minor ticket for Anna. It was a strange coincidence that she ended up meeting me and David. Willow smiled as she watched Anna play happily with David. She had once worried that Anna might feel lonely, being raised by just her, a solitary life, but now, she no longer had that worry. Pulling herself from the memories, She noticed that the two children had stopped their playful chase. We had arrived at my house. Anna waved goodbye to David, clutching her skateboard, and Willow also said her goodbyes to me. As soon as David and I got inside and I had taken off my coat, we heard a knock at the door. David rushed to open it, excitedly saying, "It's definitely Anna. She must miss me. I'll open it. I'll open it." I couldn't help but laugh at his enthusiasm. I quickly stopped him and said, "You just parted ways. What are you missing? Go wash your hands. I'll get the door." To my surprise, when I opened the door, I found Maria standing there. She was still wearing the same trench coat, and beside her was a suitcase. "I'm going back to country," she said. Chapter 22. I stood frozen for a moment. Then, I furrowed my brow and said, "Didn't I ask you to let me know before coming to find me?" I didn't even want to imagine what would have happened if David had opened the door. If he had suddenly seen Maria, he would have been terrified. Looking at Maria now, I turned and called out, "I'm going to pick up a package." I quickly stepped outside, making sure to close the door behind me. Maria stood there, watching me with a look of reproach. Her hand, resting on her suitcase, tightened and loosened. Her emotions complicated and conflicted. Her own son was so terrified of her to this extent. Maria's heart quivered. She suppressed the bitter feeling rising inside her and said, "I'm sorry. I was passing by on the way to the airport. I just wanted to say goodbye. I'll let you know next time." Was that really Maria speaking? I stared at the woman in front of me. The cold, distant aura that usually surrounded her seemed to shatter, and now she radiated a sense of dejection. For a moment, I was stunned, but quickly averted my gaze and nodded. "All right, safe travels." In the end, where Maria went had nothing to do with me. As I turned to go back inside, Maria watched me walk away, feeling her heart ache like it had been sliced open. I had been so clear in my words, showing that I no longer had any feelings for her. What was she hoping for, by coming here to say goodbye? But as she looked at my back, she couldn't help but ask, "Will you ever return to China?" I paused in my steps, turned to look at her, and through her earnest eyes, I found myself nodding. This was, after all, a foreign land. I would certainly return to China to live in the future. Maria's eyes lit up, as if a spark of hope had ignited within her. She bit her lip, seemingly wanting to say something more, but I cut her off. I said, "Even if I return to China, I might not go back to the capital." Maria froze for a moment. Her eyes dimmed slightly, but the hope didn't fade entirely. She simply said, "No matter where you are, I'll wait for you to come back." I frowned at her words, wanting to say something else, but just then, I heard David's voice from inside. "Dad, what did you buy?" I quickly suppressed the urge to speak, glanced at Maria, and said, "Safe travels." Before swiftly closing the door, Maria stood outside, watching the door slam shut without any hesitation. Rather than feeling defeated, a glimmer of hope stirred in her eyes. As long as I returned to China, there was still hope. Inside the house, I didn't know about her emotions. Instead, I spread my arms and looked at David. I didn't buy anything. It was just a wrong delivery. David scrunched up his face and pouted. I thought my Lego set had arrived. I wanted to build it with Anna tonight. I couldn't help but laugh at his disappointed expression. Smiling, I reassured him, "The Lego will arrive tomorrow. Tonight, how about we go on the Ferris wheel with Anna instead?" The Ferris wheel had just been built nearby, and there was going to be a fireworks show in the evening. David had been talking about wanting to go for a while, and when he heard this, he immediately perked up and nodded. Yes. In the evening, Willow and I stood, watching the brightly lit, bustling amusement park, and stopped in our tracks. I stared blankly at the long line for the Ferris wheel, sighing. There are so many people. After nearly a month of living here, this was the first time I had seen this neighborhood so crowded. I wasn't a fan of crowded places, especially the noise. I suddenly regretted bringing the two kids today and thought we should come again another time. But Willow grabbed my arm and said, "It's fine. The line moves fast. It won't take long." Chapter 23. I looked at her gentle eyes, hesitating for a moment. When David tugged at the corner of my shirt, he said, "Dad, I want to play." I lowered my gaze and met two pairs of bright, watery eyes, staring directly at me, filled with longing. I could only helplessly nod and sighed, agreeing. "All right." David immediately broke into a big smile, rubbing his face against my hand and coquettishly said, "You're the best, Dad." Seeing this, I could only smile and pinch his soft cheek. "You really know how to make me happy." Willow watched us under the warm, dim light, her smile gentle, her eyes clear and bright, and she couldn't help but smile softly as well. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her gaze meeting Anna's knowing look. Willow froze for a moment, then saw Anna glance at me, then at her, nodding slightly before casually looking away, as if acknowledging Willow's unspoken approval. Willow couldn't help but chuckle, ruffling Anna's golden hair, but said nothing. This little girl was already meddling in her business. The line indeed moved quickly. and within half an hour, we were on the Ferris wheel. The cabin slowly rose into the air. David and Anna sat together, while Willow and I sat across from them. It wasn't David's first time on a Ferris wheel, but it was his first time seeing the night view of Boston. He pressed his face against the window, his eyes wide with amazement as he gazed out. The night sky was overcast, but the bright moon cast a silver glow over the land, bathing everything in its light. Not far off, the city lights gleamed in the bustling town, with high-rise buildings lining up in an orderly fashion, dazzling to the eyes. David couldn't help but exclaim in wonder. Anna also looked out, her eyes drifting to the moon, lost in thought. I smiled at the sight of the two children enjoying themselves, then glanced at Willow. In that moment, I noticed something odd. Willow's lips were pale, and her hands were gripping the safety belt tightly around her waist. Despite the gentle smile she wore, her body was tense, and she deliberately avoided looking out the side windows, staring straight ahead. It was as though we weren't in a Ferris wheel cabin, but on a 1,000-meter-high tightrope. I leaned closer to Willow and asked softly, "Are you afraid of heights?" Willow quickly glanced at me, then lowered her head and said, "A little." That was when I realized, no wonder Willow was so worried about Anna, yet still let her fly alone. I couldn't help but feel guilty. It's my fault. If I'd known you were scared, I shouldn't have let you come. But Willow took a deep breath and smiled gently. "It's fine. I underestimated the Ferris wheel and overestimated myself." She said this while taking deep breaths to calm herself. But the next moment, I reached over and took off her glasses. I asked, "Would it be better if you couldn't see clearly?" My closeness made Willow momentarily dazed, and she didn't respond to my question. Seeing her face color slightly, I thought it might have worked, so I smiled and was about to suggest that she take deep breaths again to relax. But then, the cabin suddenly jerked, and stopped at the highest point. We all froze for a second. Willow's heart skipped a beat, and instinctively, she grabbed my hand. David also shouted, "Dad, it's getting dark below. Did the power go out?" At his words, Willow tightened her grip even more, and I immediately held her hand, trying to comfort her. "No, it's just stopping for the..." Before I could finish my sentence, a flash of light erupted outside the window, accompanied by a sharp whistling sound, and then a burst of fireworks exploded in the night sky. David shouted, "It's fireworks." Chapter 24. Fireworks shot up one after another, bursting in the air like flowers blooming under the moonlight, their beauty captivating. David happily leaned forward, watching the fireworks with wide eyes full of excitement. He even pulled Anna closer, and with his hands clasped together, made a wish, saying, "Wishes made under fireworks are the easiest to come true. Come on, let's do it together." Anna hesitated for a moment, then closed her eyes, following David's lead. I didn't know what wish she made, but when she opened her eyes, I saw a hint of sorrow in her gaze, as if she had sighed inwardly. I didn't have the time to focus on their little wishes, too busy looking after the patient beside me. I held Willow's hand tightly, as though offering her comfort and strength. I guided her to take deep breaths, trying to distract her by pointing out the fireworks outside. I said, "Look, the fireworks are beautiful, aren't they?" Only then did I realize her glasses were still in my hand. I quickly took them out, intending to put them back on her, and said, "Sorry, I forgot I had your glasses. You must be having trouble seeing. Let me put them on for you." She stopped me, saying, "I can see just fine." Willow smiled mischievously, lowering her voice, and whispered in my ear, "I'm not nearsighted. These glasses are just for blocking blue light." As soon as she finished, I felt my ears burn with embarrassment. I awkwardly bit my lip and chuckled. "Ha! I thought you were nearsighted." Willow looked at my flustered expression and quickly stopped smiling. Her gaze softened as she looked at me and said, "It's all right." Her voice was gentle, her warm breath brushing against my neck as she added, "Your comfort really helps." I froze, turning to look into her deep eyes. Without the glasses to obscure her gaze, I noticed that Willow had captivatingly beautiful eyes. Her lashes curled slightly at the ends, and there was a small mole just beneath her eye. The fireworks reflected in her eyes, looking like scattered stars in the sky, exuding an almost enchanting beauty. I was almost mesmerized by the depths of her eyes. The sounds of the fireworks around me seemed to fade away, as if the world had quieted down, leaving only the thumping of my heart. It beat loudly, like a drum in my ears. It wasn't until David called out to me, "Dad, you and Aunt Lou should make a wish too," that I snapped back to reality, quickly letting go of her hand. I turned back to the fireworks and instinctively closed my eyes. I'm not sure what wish I made, but my mind was filled with Willow's gentle eyes. The only thing I could hear was the thunderous sound of my own heartbeat. When the fireworks finally ended, I was able to regain my composure. The Ferris wheel began to descend slowly, and Willow's face looked much better. She didn't seem as afraid anymore. As for me, I couldn't bring myself to look directly at Willow. I felt like I couldn't face her, as if something was still lingering between us. An awkward atmosphere hung in the air, Maybe only I felt it, because Willow appeared completely at ease. Afterward, we stayed nearby, letting the kids play for a while longer. By the time we were heading home, David had played so much that he fell asleep in Willow's arms. Anna, too, was starting to get tired and followed us quietly as we walked home. The moonlight was cool, filtering through the gaps in the leaves, casting a soft glow ahead. The streetlights lit up the way back. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves underfoot. It was so silent it felt almost unnerving. The silence made me think back to the moments on the Ferris wheel, and I couldn't help but purse my lips, trying to find something to say. But Willow spoke first. Christmas is coming soon. How about we go to Iceland to see the northern lights? Chapter 25. I was stunned for a moment, looking at Willow, my eyes filled with surprise and confusion. I asked, "Why are you suddenly bringing this up?" It wasn't just me who was shocked. Anyone who, after getting off a Ferris wheel on their way home, suddenly hears about travel plans a month ahead would feel taken aback. I looked into Willow's eyes, feeling completely puzzled. Willow seemed to realize how sudden her suggestion was, and she smiled apologetically before speaking. "Honestly, I just thought of it." She glanced at George, his bright eyes shining under the dim streetlights and moonlight, which reminded her of what had just happened on the Ferris wheel. The dazzling fireworks not only reflected in her deep eyes but also illuminated the wishes I had made. My expression hidden in the shadows of the night. Only my clasped hands were visible. The moment the fireworks exploded, their vibrant colors lit up my face, as if a colorblind person were seeing the world in full color for the first time. Willow's eyes brightened. Her heart skipped a beat. Her eyelashes fluttered down, her eyes and ears tinged with a soft blush. Her brows relaxed, her beauty pure and almost untouchable. After the Ferris wheel, noticing that I seemed lost in thought, she proposed the idea of seeing the northern lights. She continued, "I've heard that wishes made under the northern lights are granted by the whole universe." Willow smiled and looked at me. "I thought you'd like it." I stared at her confident smile and couldn't help but smile back. After a moment, I nodded. "Actually, I've always wanted to see the northern lights." I remembered my parents. After I got into university, they quit their jobs at the hospital to become Doctors Without Borders. On my 20th birthday, they sent me a video. It was of them in Iceland, singing Happy Birthday under the northern lights. The quiet, dark night and the snow-covered landscape, with the brilliant aurora lighting up the sky, felt like the stars had fallen to earth. That was when I first thought about seeing the northern lights for myself. But then I got busy with my studies, had a child, and focused on following Maria's footsteps in my career. I never managed to go. Hearing Willow's invitation, I didn't hesitate at all. I nodded and said, "All right, for the Christmas holidays, let's take David and Anna and go see them." Willow smiled warmly at my answer. The night was quiet, the moonlight casting a soft glow, and a subtle warmth lingered between us. Anna glanced at us, then turned her head thoughtfully. The autumn breeze blew away the falling leaves, and soon, snow began to fall. Christmas break arrived as expected. Since Christmas and New Year's Day are close together, the holidays usually overlap, giving us 2 weeks off. It was the perfect time to visit Iceland. As I looked at David, full of energy and excitement, I couldn't help but fuss over his clothes. Giving him one last set of instructions, I said, "Make sure you hold Anna's hand. If you get lost or need help, go find someone in a uniform." "Okay. Got it." David nodded, then looked at Anna and seriously said, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll be just as brave as Anna. I'm not afraid to fly by myself." I sighed, feeling helpless as I watched the 2 kids. It was supposed to be a relaxing trip, but David insisted on flying alone, just like Anna did last time. He wouldn't hear of us accompanying them. He proudly declared, "I'm grown up now, just like Anna." After some negotiation, I only managed to get him to agree to let Anna go with him, though I didn't feel comfortable with it. Looking at their determined faces, I had no choice but to give in. We booked an early flight for ourselves, and they would take a later one. As the boarding announcement came, Willow and I were called to board our flight. I was about to say something else when Anna wrote a few words in my palm. She wrote, "I'll take care of David, don't worry." Chapter 26. I looked at Anna's calm eyes, which were filled with determination. It felt like her words weren't just meant to reassure me, but to make up for something. I thought of something and decided not to nag further. I gently ruffled her hair and said softly, "I trust you." Willow also reminded Anna, "Make sure to hold your brother's hand and don't get lost. After the flight, we'll meet at the exit." Then she slipped an asthma inhaler into Anna's jacket pocket, adding, "It's been a while since the last attack, but just in case." Anna nodded silently, looking at us. I thought she was urging us to board quickly, so I was about to leave with Willow. But then I saw Anna tilt her head and glance at me before gesturing a few times to Willow. Willow paused, seeming a bit helpless, then laughed softly and patted Anna's head, saying something in German. The sign language was a bit complicated, and I couldn't quite understand it, but the German words were clear. and I caught the affectionate tone, which seemed like a playful nickname for a mischievous child. As I was puzzled, the boarding announcement sounded again, urging us to board. David also waved and said, "Dad, you go ahead. I'll make sure to take care of sister and myself." Though David was shorter than Anna, his words made me laugh, and I gently tapped his nose. I said, "You just take care of yourself, you're not even half her size yet." After saying that, I felt a little relieved and said goodbye to both of them before heading to the gate. Once we were on the plane, I suddenly remembered Anna's earlier gestures and couldn't help but ask Willow, "What did Anna say to you just now?" Willow saw the confusion in my eyes and seemed to hesitate, as if something she wanted to say got caught in her throat. She replied, "She knows I'm afraid of heights, so she asked you to take care of me." Immediately, my attention shifted to Willow's face. I asked anxiously, "Are you okay now?" Before departure, I had asked Willow, and she had smiled and said, "As long as I'm not next to the window, I'll be fine." Her answer had been vague, and I was already a bit skeptical, now even more on edge as I noticed the worry in her eyes. Willow noticed my anxious expression and felt a warmth in her heart. She almost wanted to reassure me, but after pushing her glasses up, she looked up at me with a hint of vulnerability. She said, "I'm fine now, just a little scared during takeoff and landing." I immediately furrowed my brows. Takeoff and landing are when the sensation of weightlessness is strongest, and that's exactly when people with a fear of heights struggle the most. I hesitated for a moment before leaning toward her. Willow, still composed, watched me get closer and asked teasingly, "Are you going to take off my glasses again this time?" I froze, feeling embarrassed. No. I thought about the awkward situation on the Ferris wheel and felt the heat rush to my face. I quickly glanced at her and added, "Do you still want to feel better or not?" My tone wasn't really angry, more like embarrassed. Willow wasn't bothered at all. She nodded gently and said, "Please, Dr. Wong, guide me." Her voice was soft, with an almost imperceptible smile that made my ears turn red, but the plane had already started taxiing, so I quickly pulled out the earplugs and said, "Use these. It will ease the pressure on your eardrums." As the plane picked up speed, I spoke faster. "You can also tighten your stomach and leg muscles during takeoff to help with the weightlessness. If it gets too uncomfortable, just talk to me and distract yourself." Before I finished, Willow's warm hand gently grasped mine. She said, "This is still the most effective." As the plane took off, my heart felt like it was free-falling. Weightless. Chapter 27. The plane landed at Keflavik Airport, and Willow and I had already picked up our checked luggage. We found our down jackets and sat on a bench at the exit, waiting for David and Anna. Willow looked at me, puzzled, as I still had my gloves on. "Aren't you hot?" The temperature inside the airport was quite warm, making people drowsy, and some foreigners were even wearing short sleeves. I pressed my lips together and awkwardly smiled before removing the gloves. I don't know how I ended up wearing them. I was lying. Willow, seeing how I avoided her gaze, immediately realized I was lying, but she didn't call me out on it, pretending not to notice and nodding. I could feel the warmth of Willow's touch still lingering on my hands. Even though we had been off the plane for a while, it was warm, firm, and carried a faint floral scent that left me feeling flustered. I stole a quick glance at Willow, seeing her expression of indifference, but it made me feel like I was overthinking things. Just then, Willow glanced over at me, and I quickly looked away. A strange, uncomfortable silence settled between us, until the kids arrived. David said, "Dad, sister didn't have an asthma attack. I took good care of her, didn't I?" David's face lit up the moment he saw us, even before he reached us, his voice full of pride and asking for praise. I squatted down, took his little backpack, and praised him. "David, you're amazing." Then I patted Anna's head. "Anna, you're great too. You took care of your brother so well." "Awesome." Anna's eyes flickered, and she shyly nodded, looking away. David was still in high spirits and kept talking. "All the big sister said I'm great." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders as I watched him so happy. It had been a long time since David had been this joyful. Thinking about it, Willow spoke up. "The host of the guest house is here to pick us up. Let's go." We all nodded, changed our clothes, and headed out. We were staying at a guest house 30 kilometers from Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland. The host was a local, a typical Nordic man, who greeted us politely and helped us with our luggage. His English was a bit broken but understandable. When he learned we were there to see the Northern Lights for Christmas, he enthusiastically recommended his sister. He said, "Olivia is an experienced Northern Lights hunter. She's taken many people to see them." Willow and I exchanged a glance, knowing we had found the right person. Viewing the Northern Lights requires a lot of luck, but with an experienced guide, it would definitely make the experience much easier. I could hardly wait to meet the Olivia the host had mentioned. Just then, the host glanced at us through the rearview mirror and said, There's a legend in Iceland. Lovers who see the northern lights together are blessed by the gods and will have a lifetime of happiness. At his words, I froze. I awkwardly looked away, but my gaze landed right on Willow's smiling eyes. She raised an eyebrow, and in the shadow of the car, only her eyes seemed to glow with an intense light. Staring straight into my heart skipped a beat, and I couldn't help but think back to the Ferris wheel in the airplane cabin. Feeling both flustered and awkward, I almost instinctively turned my gaze away, biting my lip, ready to explain. But Willow spoke up first. That's a very romantic legend. She neither denied nor confirmed it, as though she didn't fully understand the host's meaning. Smoothly changing the subject, she said, "We'd like to ask Olivia if she's available to guide us to see the northern lights." The men turned the steering wheel and said, "I'm not sure, but Olivia lives right next door. You can ask her when we get there." Chapter 28. We arrived at the guest house smoothly. Willow intended to help with the luggage, but I smiled and stopped her, saying, "I've got it covered here. Take the kids upstairs to rest for a while and adjust to the time difference." Willow looked at the two exhausted kids with barely open eyes, nodded, and took them upstairs to wash up and tuck them in. Icelanders seem to have a natural ability to sense romance. Even though the guest house owner couldn't understand our language, he could still feel the closeness between us. He murmured something in Icelandic, "A happy family." Willow just happened to hear it and couldn't help but smile, replying in Icelandic, "Thank you." The owner was somewhat surprised. Seeing our Eastern faces, he had instinctively spoken English, but now he realized that Willow understood Icelandic. Willow explained, "I lived in Iceland for a while with my parents." She added with a slight smile, "They fell in love under the aurora." Looking around at the snow-covered landscape and the bright sky, Willow took a deep breath of the cold air, which instantly awakened childhood memories. She remembered back then, under the northern lights, her family sat around a tent, warming themselves by the fire. Her mother told stories and played the harmonica. It was warm and nostalgic. Willow lifted her gaze and saw the lights of the guest house upstairs. It felt like seeing her childhood home again, and she smiled gently. After a day of rest, we got into Olivia's car at 3 a.m., dressed in our gear and ready for the aurora hunt. Olivia was a tall and muscular woman, only half a head shorter than me. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, and a few wrinkles around her eyes showed that she wasn't young anymore, but her eyes were still sharp, and she spoke briefly. "The weather is good recently, so we should have a good chance of seeing the aurora." As she drove, she kept glancing at satellite maps and cloud patterns, adjusting the direction frequently. The night was pitch black, as if engulfed by a thick fog, with only the headlights illuminating the icy plains. In the distance, I could vaguely see the jagged outlines of snowy mountains. I marveled at the magnificence of nature but also worried about the kids. I turned around to check if David was cold, but he was eagerly pressed against the window, staring outside. Despite not being able to see much, he was undeterred and asked Olivia, "How much longer?" Olivia glanced at him, turned the steering wheel, and pressed the gas pedal. Half an hour. Half an hour later, we arrived at the first observation point, only to be told, "The wind has shifted, and the chances of seeing the aurora here are very low." After moving to 2 more locations, by the time we reached the 3rd observation point, no one had much hope of seeing the aurora anymore. The wind on the ice plains was sharp and biting. I told David and Anna to stay in the car while Willow and I got out. Looking up at the pitch-black sky, only the stars twinkled, making the place feel desolate. I exhaled and rubbed my numb hands, gazing at the direction where the aurora might appear, feeling a sense of melancholy. The aurora was a rare sight. It seemed like I wouldn't see it this time. Just then, a rich fragrance suddenly reached my nose. I turned to see Willow handing me a cup of hot cocoa. "Drink something warm to help you feel better," she said. I took the cup, thanked her, and drank it in one go. Warmth spread through my body, comforting my insides. Willow noticed my disappointment and comforted me. "We'll definitely see the aurora." I took it as mere consolation and smiled faintly, lowering my gaze. Olivia even said, "It's not certain." "How can you be so sure?" She replied softly, "Because you're with me." Her voice was tender, but my heart skipped a beat. I stared at Willow, seeing deep, intense love in her eyes, like the shimmering stars of the aurora itself. Just as I was about to say something, David and Anna came running over. David exclaimed, "The aurora! The aurora is here." Chapter 29. The bluish-green starlight in the sky resembled ink splashed by an artist, casually trailing beautiful light across the sky. Amid the glow, a few brilliant stars sparkled, their dazzling light and the stars themselves spreading across the horizon, making it impossible to look away. I stared at the vibrant aurora, my eyes filled with admiration. It felt as though I was seeing the edge of the world, glimpsing the vastness and magnificence of the universe. The scenery was so breathtaking that I could hardly focus on anything else. Unaware of Willow standing beside me, her eyes burning with intensity. The aurora was George's landscape, but Willow's landscape was George. Under the starry sky, his eyes seemed to hold the universe within them, making it impossible to look away. It wasn't until a hoarse call startled us that we snapped back to reality. Mom. It was Anna. David was the first to hear, looking at Anna, who was lost in the aurora. In surprise, he asked, Anna, you can talk now. David's exclamation made Willow and me rush over. My eyes were filled with shock. I knew Anna had refused to speak due to trauma, but I hadn't realized that this trauma was connected to the aurora. Before I could say anything, a cold wind swept past. In the next moment, Anna's intense coughing filled the air, her chest heaving violently, her face turning red, the sensation of suffocation washing over her, but she still seemed mesmerized, her eyes fixed on the aurora, unwilling to look away. I froze for a second, then realized it was an asthma attack. I immediately rushed to the car to get the asthma medication, but Willow seemed to have anticipated this. She quickly approached, took out the medication from her pocket, and sprayed it into Anna's mouth. Take a deep breath, she said softly, holding Anna's head steady to prevent her from struggling, all the while gently reminding her to breathe steadily. David and I stood in front of her, blocking the harsh cold air of the icy plains. I explained to Olivia, who had stepped forward, it's the cold air that triggered her asthma attack. Olivia nodded and not only shielded us from the wind but also handed Anna a bottle of hot water. Anna took it and drank, and after a moment, she had calmed down. Her breathing was steady again, and aside from a slight redness in her ears, it was hard to tell she'd just had difficulty breathing. David, excited and a little curious, said to her, Anna, your voice sounds so nice. His clear, innocent gaze warmed Anna's heart. She smiled faintly. Thank you, David. It was a good thing that Anna could speak again. I watched David, who was bouncing around Anna, and smiled warmly. I remembered how Willow had said before we left that she hoped this trip would help Anna overcome her trauma with the aurora. Years ago, Anna's parents and younger brother had died in a fire at a house they were staying at while on the way to see the aurora. Anna had escaped because she was outside at the time. The aurora had always been a hurdle in her heart, but now that she had seen it and survived the experience, she was able to speak again. It seemed our goal had been accomplished. Lost in thought, I unconsciously turned around to look for Willow, and unexpectedly, I found myself falling into her deep, captivating gaze. Willow wasn't wearing glasses, and her eyes, filled with mesmerizing beauty, made it hard for me to look away. I froze for a moment, about to say something, but Willow raised a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. Then she glanced at her phone. I was puzzled, but in the next second, she looked at me, her smile radiant and her eyes sincere. She said, on Beijing time, December 25th, 12 a.m., happy birthday, George. The starlit sky seemed to frame her words, and as I looked into her eyes, I saw the aurora, the snow-covered mountains, and myself. It took me a long moment to regain my composure. Just as I was about to speak, my phone rang. Without thinking, I picked it up. It was Maria. Chapter 30. I hesitated for a moment, then gave Willow an apologetic smile before turning to answer the call. Since our last parting, Maria had called a few times. David had already figured out that Maria wouldn't take him away, so he wasn't afraid of the calls, though he was always brief, quickly ending the conversation. I rarely spoke with her either, and whenever she called, it was mostly a few words before passing the phone to David. Now, I had a feeling she was calling for something important, but the first thing she said when I answered was a low, tired voice. Happy birthday, George. Her voice was clear, but it carried an unmistakable weariness, and I could hear the hustle and bustle of a hospital in the background. I immediately realized that she had been working nonstop and had called precisely at the moment, probably to hang up and go back to a surgery or meeting right after. A shiver ran through me. From across the world, an early morning call, just to wish me a happy birthday. If this had happened before, I would have been moved beyond words. After all, Maria had never spent a birthday with me in all those years. But now, all I felt was calm, and oddly enough, I found myself thinking, so Maria remembers my birthday. I looked up and couldn't help but smile at my own self-deprecation, but when I spoke, my tone was distant and polite. Thank you. It's kind of you to remember, she replied, almost urgently. It's no trouble. Her guilt and regret were impossible to hide, as was her care for me and the kids. Maria wasn't asking to fix things between us. She only wanted to do better by George and the kids, perhaps even to make up for those lost years. But I wasn't giving her that chance. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up. She hesitated for a moment before saying, wait. It sounded like she stopped for a moment before asking, I bought gifts for you and David. Will you be able to accept them? I replied honestly, we're on vacation. We won't be back until after New Year's. I was about to hang up, but I heard Maria's voice tremble. We haven't talked in so long. Don't you want to ask me anything? Her tone was flat, but I could sense a faint, almost imperceptible plea. I furrowed my brow. I had no interest in her matters anymore. I'm not interested in your life, I said. Fearing she might misunderstand again, I clarified, "Our only connection is the kids. If you care about him, that's enough. Don't worry about me." There was silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of the wind howling in my ear. Just when I thought Maria wouldn't say anything else and I was about to hang up, I heard a soft, almost trembling question. "Is there someone you like now?" My breath caught, and for some reason, Willow came to mind. Her sparkling eyes beneath the fireworks and aurora. I paused for a moment, then didn't answer directly. I hung up the phone. Olivia said, "The aurora is fading. We should go." I came back to my senses and looked up at the fading aurora. The lonely night sky outlined the distant mountains. The biting wind blew across, scattering the heaviness in my heart. For some reason, I remembered the video my parents had sent me when I was 20. They had made a wish under the aurora, hoping their son would have the freedom to choose love and the freedom to refuse love, to live freely without regrets. In this frozen world, my thoughts had never been so clear and vivid. I looked at Willow, and a warmth filled my heart. Even David knew it was my birthday, and when he regretted that I hadn't made a wish under the aurora, I smiled softly. I said, "No need to make a wish. The most important one has already come true." Chapter 31. When Willow heard my words, something in her heart suddenly brightened. Back at the guest house, the two children were already asleep. The sky was beginning to show the light gray of dawn, and the black night in Reykjavik was giving way to the quiet arrival of day. I looked at the two of them, peacefully nestled together in their sleep, and smiled with a sense of relief and freedom. I pulled the curtains for them, turned, and stepped outside. Instantly, I was embraced by a warm, citrus-scented presence. Willow's gaze was gentle, and she opened her fist in front of me to reveal a diamond-studded watch. I froze for a moment, hearing her sweet voice. "Your birthday gift. I didn't get a chance to give it to you earlier." Still not wearing her glasses, Willow's eyes, slightly tilted, held a captivating beauty that made me lose myself for a second. Was it the diamond? Or was it Willow herself? The diamond shimmered like the brightest star, reminding me of the fireworks and the aurora from earlier today. I hesitated for a moment, thinking it was too expensive and almost rejecting it, but Willow spoke first. "You don't have to feel burdened. This is just a gift. I just want you to be happy." Looking into her warm eyes, I felt a stir in my heart and smiled. "All right, I'll accept it." Just as I reached out to take it, I paused, then bit my lip. "Could you put it on me?" Willow was taken aback. She hadn't expected me to ask that. After all, she was always the more proactive one, while I had always been polite, careful with my words and actions. Even today, under the aurora, she had hesitated, unsure if she might have frightened me with her words. Now, she wasn't sure whether this was a signal, a step closer to what she had hoped for. As she saw me extend my bare wrist, Willow's gaze shifted slightly. She swallowed her excitement, steadying herself as if preparing for a delicate surgery. Slowly, she took my arm, guiding the watch onto my wrist. The proximity was too intimate. Willow had always believed she was the one leading, doing everything to entice George into these subtle, flirtatious exchanges, hoping he'd grow to like her. But now, just a hint of closeness from me made her hands tremble, a sensation she hadn't anticipated. The soft scent of wood and flowers lingered in the air, like an irresistible fragrance that made it impossible not to be captivated. It all happened in an instant. Her thoughts raced, but her hands were swift and steady as she finished putting the watch on. Stepping back with a small sigh, she noticed the flush on my ears, and a teasing smile formed on her lips. "Your ears are red." I froze for a second, and a blush spread across my face. I bit my lip and glanced at her. "It's because I like you that my ears turned red." Willow's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, she couldn't quite process what I said. Then, after a few seconds of stunned silence, she whispered, "Like." I had always seen her as calm and composed, but now, seeing her flustered, I couldn't help but find it endearing. I couldn't resist leaning closer, cupping her face in my hands, and planting a kiss near her lips. "I like you." As I pulled away, I felt her arms wrap tightly around me, pulling me back into another deep kiss. Our lips met once more, and after a long, passionate exchange, we broke apart, breathless. Willow's cheeks were flushed, her lips wet, and she looked at me as if inviting me for more. My gaze darkened as I gently nudged her forehead with mine, brushing her nose with mine. She whispered, "I love you." Outside, the snow piled up 3 feet thick, and the cold wind blew across the ice field. But inside, the warmth was like spring, and we exchanged another kiss under the gentle light. Chapter 32. Adult relationships always seem to move slowly during the stage of ambiguity, but once they are clear, it's like a wildfire, everything falling into place effortlessly. The trip to Iceland ended, and the 4 of us headed back. The children had adjusted well. Back home, David looked at me with a mischievous glint in his eyes and ran up, asking, "Dad, should I call Willow Mom now?" I sighed, knowing he was teasing, and almost reached out to tug his ear, but before I could, the doorbell rang. Willow immediately shielded David and said, David's just joking. You go open the door. I'll talk to him. I retracted my hand and went to answer the door. To my surprise, it was Maria standing outside. Maria. I paused, unsure of her visit, and just as I was about to ask, Willow appeared behind me, casually slipping her arm around mine and standing beside me in a show of intimacy. Maria's face immediately changed. She saw us together. The moment Maria saw us close together, her heart sank. The tiredness from back-to-back flights and cross-ocean travels had been nothing compared to the pain this simple gesture caused. The truth had hit her. I was moving on. For all the times before, our relationship had ended, but she had never felt this way. Now, she truly understood what it meant to lose me. I had already moved forward, and she was left standing still. Maria looked at me with a mix of surprise and sorrow, swallowed her emotions, and reached into her bag to pull out a gift box. This is your birthday gift, she said, her hands trembling slightly, not from the gift but from the weight of her own feelings. I glanced at her but took the box from her, feeling a sudden heaviness in my heart. She remained silent for a moment before I broke the silence. Is there anything else? Maria hesitated, as if deciding whether to share something. Before responding, Makoto and his college classmate are getting married in March. If you're free, would you like to come? I was taken aback but nodded. I'll be there. After a moment of awkward silence, I asked, should I bring David? Do you want to see him? She shook her head. No need, she said, her lips tight, then stood up to leave. I have work to do. I can't stay any longer. With that, Maria turned and left. Willow and I stood silently, watching her retreating figure. I couldn't help but feel perplexed. She flew all this way, just to drop off a gift. Willow, sensing the change in the air, nudged me gently. Don't worry about her. We haven't packed yet. She leaned in, placing a soft kiss on my lips before pulling me into the living room. Let's pack our bags. We're going out to have Chinese food to celebrate your belated birthday. David and Anna both eagerly agreed. Okay. I smiled, seeing how much lighter and happier Anna had become and how David beamed with excitement. None of us could have anticipated that this warmth and happiness would become our everyday life. Then, on the day I graduated from Harvard Medical School, I knelt down on one knee, surrounded by flowers and the envious gazes of others. I asked Willow to marry me. Everything fell into place. Anna tilted her head and called me uncle, while David, without hesitation, jumped into Willow's arms, shouting, Mom. Looking at David's joy, I smiled gently. Willow saw it, walked toward me, wrapped her arms around me, and said, Mr. Wong, I will love you forever, for the rest of my life. The last time she had said that, we were in the icy fields of Iceland. This time, it was under the bright sun in Boston. I didn't hesitate. I embraced her and whispered back, I love you too. Anna gently covered David's eyes with her hands. Under the long daylight, in the warmth of the sun, we shared a long kiss.